Millions of Americans are waking up to a nightmare they never imagined. Groceries that once cost $12 now hit $32. Rent that was $1,100 has exploded to $1,900. A hospital stay can trap you in a $28,000 bill or an 83-year payment plan. Meanwhile, the job market is so broken that people are applying to 2,000 to 3,000 jobs and hearing nothing back. Wages crawl up 4%, while the cost of simply being alive jumps 20%, 30%, even 40%. This isn't inflation. This is a system breaking in real time. And the middle class is getting crushed first. The most disturbing part of today's economy isn't a single crisis. It's the fact that basic arithmetic no longer works for the average American. For decades, the system relied on a simple formula. Wages rise slowly, costs rise slowly, and the middle class survives somewhere in between. But that equation has shattered. Today, wages inch up 3 to 4%, while essential expenses climb 15 to 40% in the same period. That gap isn't theoretical. It's the exact reason millions are falling behind, even if they work full-time and budget with military precision. Start with fixed necessities. The average rent increase over the last 3 years alone is more than $500 per month, creating a national rent burden where families routinely spend 40% to 60% of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. Utilities that once cost $120 are now $220 to $260, and car insurance premiums have risen nearly 20% year over year in some states. Meanwhile, employer wages have barely moved, and in many industries, real earnings are actually falling after inflation adjustments. The math simply breaks. When everyday bills rise faster than income, no budget, no matter how disciplined, can close that gap. Then add the essentials that used to be manageable. The average grocery bill has jumped by more than 25% since 2020, with basic staples doubling in price. Transportation, necessary for commuting, now demands monthly payments averaging $733 for new vehicles. Even childcare costs have exploded, reaching $10,000 to $17,000 per year in many urban areas. Every essential category that defines middle-class life has inflated beyond wage capacity. This is why the narrative of "learn to budget better" has collapsed. The math proves that even perfect budgeting cannot overcome structural price surges. When a household gains $2,000 more income per year but faces $6,000 to $10,000 more in annual expenses, failure is not financial irresponsibility. It is mathematical inevitability. And this growing imbalance is not isolated. It is the foundation upon which every other crisis, healthcare, housing, the job market, and business closures will build. When the basic cost of existing rises faster than the money people earn, the entire economic ladder breaks from the bottom up. The middle class is not struggling. It is being structurally erased by an equation that no longer works. Among all the crises squeezing American families, nothing feels more personal or more humiliating than the grocery store. It's the moment where the cost of living crisis becomes unavoidable. You can ignore political arguments, you can ignore stock market charts, but you cannot ignore the moment when a bag of basic groceries rings up at $72 when it used to cost $38. The grocery aisle has become the new battlefield of the middle class, and the numbers reveal a situation spiraling far beyond normal inflation. Since 2020, food prices have surged over 25%, and that's the average. Many staples have exploded much higher. Eggs jumped from $1.50 to over $6 before partially easing. Butter climbed 30%, cereal nearly 25%, pasta more than 20%, and meat prices, especially beef, hit historic highs, with some cuts rising 40 to 60%. A pack of chicken that once cost $6.99 now hits $13 to $16, depending on the region. And even with occasional dips, the baseline never returns to what it was. Every sale is just a smaller loss. Shrinkflation makes it even worse. Bags of chips have lost 2 to 3 ounces. Cereal boxes have shrunk 10 to 15%. Yogurt cups are smaller, and ice cream containers no longer hold a real half-gallon. Consumers are paying more than ever while receiving less than ever. a stealth tax that quietly drains bank accounts. Behind this crisis is a perfect storm of cost drivers. Supply chain disruptions that never fully recovered, fuel costs that push transportation prices upward, global crop shortages, fertilizer spikes, and labor instability. But layered on top of all of this is corporate behavior. Major food companies have increased prices faster than their own expenses, leading to record profits while families struggle with the aftermath. In some categories, corporate margins hit their highest point in 70 years. The result is a new economic reality where food inflation directly alters how Americans live. Households that once comfortably spent $120 to $150 a week now pay $220 to $300 for the same items. Families cut fresh produce, reduce meat consumption, shop at multiple stores to chase sales, or rely on discount scraps just to get through the month. Nearly 70% of Americans now say rising grocery costs are their biggest financial stressor, more than rent, more than utilities, even more than healthcare. And this connects directly to the bigger crisis unfolding everywhere else. When feeding a family drains this much income, there is nothing left for savings, nothing left for emergencies, and nothing left for the local businesses that depend on consumer spending. Grocery inflation isn't just a household inconvenience. It is the clearest warning sign that the middle class is losing the ability to sustain itself at the most basic level. If groceries exposed how unstable everyday life has become, housing reveals the full-scale financial warfare facing the American middle class. Shelter, once the core of economic stability, has turned into the most aggressive wealth extraction mechanism in the country. The numbers alone are enough to show how severe the transformation has been. National median rent has surged past $2,000 with increases of 15 to 30% in many cities in just a few years. In several metros, renters now spend half their income simply to keep a roof overhead. This environment isn't driven by normal supply and demand cycles. It is the result of structural forces that systematically push middle-income families into lifelong dependency. Wall Street investment groups have purchased tens of thousands of single-family homes, converting once affordable neighborhoods into permanent rental markets. Corporate landlords often raise rents $150 to $300 at a time, creating price floors that small landlords are forced to match. When financial institutions control the housing stock, housing becomes less a human necessity and more a profit algorithm. Home ownership, the traditional path to middle-class security, is slipping out of reach for millions. The average home price now sits above $420,000, while mortgage interest rates have climbed to levels that add $700 to $1,200 per month to payments compared to just a few years ago. Even buyers with stable incomes find themselves locked out because down payments are rising faster than people can save. A generation ago, a 20% down payment could be achieved with disciplined budgeting. Today, that same down payment requires $60,000 to $100,000, a sum that is mathematically impossible for most families whose incomes barely keep pace with essentials. The proposed 50-year mortgage is perhaps the clearest sign of where the system is heading. Stretching debt across a lifetime so the homeowner becomes a long-term revenue stream rather than a wealth-building participant. And as mortgage terms expand, retirement becomes more distant, turning the final decades of work into an obligation just to keep up with housing debt. The impact of this housing pressure directly links back to the previous crises. When shelter consumes so much income, it restricts food budgets, drains emergency savings, and amplifies financial vulnerability. Housing is no longer a neutral expense. It has become the central battlefield where the middle class is losing ground the fastest and with the highest long-term consequences. The next layer of the crisis is even more brutal because it strikes without warning. If inflated grocery bills drain families monthly and housing pressures tighten every year, healthcare wipes them out in a single moment. The U.S. medical system has evolved into a debt manufacturing machine where getting sick is not just a health risk, it is a financial catastrophe that can erase decades of hard work instantly. Medical costs have climbed to levels that defy logic. The average employer-based insurance premium for a family now exceeds $22,000 per year, split between payroll deductions and monthly contributions that easily reach $450 to $700. Deductibles that once hovered around $900 now routinely exceed $5,000 to $8,000, meaning people must pay thousands before insurance covers a single dollar. Even basic procedures are priced at levels incompatible with middle-class income. A simple CT scan can cost $1,800. An overnight hospital stay often exceeds $12,000, and a short ER visit frequently ends with a bill between $3,000 and $6,000. The most disturbing part is that many of these costs have nothing to do with actual medical necessity. Hospitals charge wildly different prices for the same procedure depending on the patient's insurance, location, or bargaining power. Pharmaceutical companies increase drug prices annually, even when production costs stay flat, creating markups of 500% to 1,000% on life-saving medications. Insurers shift costs to consumers through narrow networks, surprise billing, and opaque pricing that prevents families from budgeting or preparing. The result is an environment where a medical event costing $800 a decade ago now generates a $6,000 to $20,000 liability. Medical debt is not an inconvenience. It is a long-term trap. More than 100 million Americans currently carry some form of healthcare debt, and many will never fully pay it off. Payment plans stretch across 20 to 80 years, making medical bills functionally similar to lifetime loans. Credit scores plummet, borrowing power collapses, and future financial opportunities disappear. This reinforces the broader economic problem. When a society forces families to choose between medical care and basic survival, both their health and financial stability deteriorate simultaneously. And because medical emergencies are unpredictable, healthcare becomes the ultimate destabilizer. It turns a fragile household budget, already strained by rent, groceries, and transportation, into a structure that can collapse overnight. This is not accidental. It is a systemic design that converts illness into long-term revenue while leaving the middle class with nothing but debt, fear, and financial exhaustion. As medical costs turn illness into a financial sentence, another disturbing reality becomes clear. Even having a job no longer provides the stability it once promised. The American labor market has shifted from a ladder of opportunity into a maze of uncertainty where effort, skill, and loyalty no longer translate into economic security. What used to be a reliable pact between workers and employers has eroded into a system where jobs exist on paper, but stability has vanished in practice. Hiring has become increasingly dysfunctional. Applicants routinely send out hundreds to thousands of resumes with no response. Ghost postings, job listings left active despite no intent to hire, now fill major platforms. Automated screening systems filter out qualified workers before a human ever sees their application. Meanwhile, over 80% of all new jobs created in recent years have been part-time, temporary, or contract-based, offering no benefits and unpredictable hours. Wages tell an even harsher story. While the cost of basic survival has surged, median hourly earnings have risen only 3 to 4% annually, barely matching inflation. The federal minimum wage remains stuck at $7.25, a rate that yields $58 after a full 8-hour day, before taxes. Even jobs requiring degrees and specialized skills now pay salaries that cannot support independent living in most of the country. Underemployment has quietly become the norm, with millions working full-time while remaining below or near the poverty line. At the corporate level, job security has evaporated. Companies aggressively downsize to satisfy shareholders, cutting thousands of positions in restructuring cycles that occur regardless of profitability. Layoffs in sectors like tech, banking, retail, manufacturing, and transportation regularly eliminate tens of thousands of jobs at a time. Automation and artificial intelligence add another layer of displacement, replacing roles faster than new ones are created. The result is a workforce caught in permanent instability, never certain when the next round of cuts will come. The job market illusion links directly to every previous pressure point. When employment no longer guarantees a stable income, families cannot withstand rising rents, inflated food prices, or unpredictable medical bills. The idea that hard work always pays off collapses under an economic model where work has been devalued while essential expenses rise relentlessly. Employment still exists, but the security that once came with it has been stripped away, leaving millions working harder than ever while falling further behind. When employment no longer guarantees stability, the impact ripples outward. And nowhere is that shock more visible than in the collapse of American businesses. The economy depends on consumer spending, yet disposable income has fallen to some of the lowest levels in modern history. As essential costs absorb the majority of household budgets, restaurants, retailers, and service providers are now facing a crisis they cannot survive. Customers who simply can't afford to participate in the economy anymore. The restaurant sector has become a frontline casualty. Fast casual prices have risen 30 to 50% since 2020, pushing the average meal for one person above $15 to $18. For families, dining out routinely exceeds $60 to $80, an amount impossible to justify when grocery bills, rent, and medical costs devour paychecks. As a result, foot traffic has fallen sharply, with many establishments reporting declines of 20 to 40%. Even large chains, traditionally insulated from downturns, are closing locations because profitability collapses once customer volume falls below a critical threshold. Retail faces the same pressure. Clothing stores, mom-and-pop shops, and regional businesses are shutting their doors as discretionary spending evaporates. Major retailers have announced closures of hundreds of stores nationwide due to shrinking customer budgets and rising operational costs. When Americans must prioritize survival spending over everything else, entire sectors of the economy lose their customer base. This collapse isn't driven by poor management. It is driven by the mathematical reality described earlier. A household paying higher rents, inflated grocery costs, soaring utilities, and unpredictable healthcare bills has nothing left to spend at restaurants or shops. Disposable income, once the engine of American consumer culture, is being squeezed out of existence. Without it, businesses cannot sustain staff, inventory, or margins. And the consequences expand far beyond closed storefronts. When businesses die, jobs disappear. When jobs disappear, fewer people can afford basic expenses, creating another wave of closures. It becomes a self-feeding loop. A decline in disposable income destroys businesses, and business failures destroy income. This cycle accelerates the unraveling of the middle class because the economy itself begins to contract from the bottom. The collapse of American businesses is not an isolated trend. It is the economic expression of a society where the cost of living has consumed every spare dollar. As purchasing power evaporates, the country drifts toward an economy where essentials dominate spending and everything else fades, leaving behind empty malls, shuttered restaurants, and communities with nothing left to sustain them. As businesses fold and disposable income evaporates, the consequences land hardest on the generations expected to carry the nation into the future. Gen Z and millennials are confronting an economic landscape fundamentally different from the one their parents navigated. One where financial milestones are mathematically unattainable, not delayed by poor choices or lack of discipline. The gap between what life costs and what life pays has widened into a generational gulf. Housing alone blocks upward mobility. The average rent for a one-bedroom in many cities now exceeds $1,700 to $2,300, while entry-level wages often fall between $32,000 and $45,000 annually before taxes. This means 50 to 70% of income is consumed by shelter before food, transportation, or healthcare are even considered. Home ownership, once achievable in one's late 20s or early 30s, now requires down payments of $60,000 to $100,000, a figure impossible to save when most people have nothing left at the end of the month. Education, once promoted as the universal path to success, adds another layer of financial obstruction. A bachelor's degree now costs an average of $58,000, saddling graduates with student loan balances around $40,000 each. Interest rates ensure that many young adults repay for 20 to 30 years, eliminating their ability to build savings or invest early, the very foundations of generational wealth. Transportation costs magnify the problem. The average new car price has soared beyond $50,000, driving monthly payments over $700, even for basic models. Insurance premiums have surged, pushing costs even higher. A job may require a car, Yet the car required to keep the job locks people into more debt. Credit card interest rates further trap younger generations. A PRS of 22 to 33% ensure that any debt carried becomes exponentially harder to escape. Even small emergencies, tires, a medical bill, a sudden rent increase, can launch a person into long-term financial quicksand. All of this connects directly to the crisis hitting the entire economy. When young adults can't save, can't buy homes, and can't participate in consumer spending, the economic engine loses its future. This isn't a generation that refuses to grow up. It's a generation that is being priced out of adulthood. Gen Z and millennials aren't failing to advance. The cost of living crisis has structurally removed every rung from the economic ladder they were told to climb. As younger generations fall behind and the middle class weakens, a deeper structural force takes over: the K-shaped economy. It describes a nation splitting into two completely different economic realities. One group rising sharply upward, while the majority slides downward. The same inflation, the same interest rates, the same shortages are hitting everyone, yet the outcomes couldn't be more opposite. This divergence begins with ownership. The stock market has climbed more than 20%, even as wages grew only 3 to 4%. For households that own stocks, real estate, or business equity, those gains translate into rising net worth. But for families dependent solely on salaries, it means falling purchasing power and shrinking financial security. The economy rewards capital, not labor, and that imbalance widens every year. Corporate compensation structures reflect this divide. Executive pay has grown at staggering multiples, often 200 to 300 times that of the average worker. Profits surge even during economic turbulence because corporations can raise prices at will, passing increased costs directly onto consumers. When inflation occurs, companies adjust prices far faster than their own expenses rise, creating record profits while households buckle under the weight of inflated essentials. Shareholders benefit from this imbalance. Workers absorb its full cost. Asset inflation adds another layer. Homes appreciate by $20,000 to $50,000 a year in many markets, while renters fall further behind with every lease renewal. Stock portfolios gain value even when real wages stagnate. Those with assets multiply wealth simply by holding them. Those without see the door to wealth building slam shut. This directly connects to every earlier pressure point. When the top portion of the economy accelerates upward while the majority is pushed down by housing costs, inflated groceries, rising insurance premiums, and unstable employment, the middle class is squeezed out from both sides. The K-shaped split accelerates inequality automatically. The upward line grows through capital appreciation, while the downward line grows through cost inflation and stagnant earnings. The result is an economy where the same crisis functions as both a wealth engine for a small segment and a financial sinkhole for everyone else. It is not a temporary distortion. It is the operating system of the modern economy, one that ensures the rich rise faster while the middle class is pushed closer to disappearance. As the K-shaped economy pushes wealth upward and burdens downward, a new phase of the crisis emerges. Growing public anger directed at a political system that appears increasingly detached from the realities facing ordinary Americans. When people watch their living costs explode, their wages stagnate, and their savings evaporate, while elected officials remain insulated with six-figure salaries, premium healthcare, and guaranteed pensions, frustration transforms into open rage. Taxes intensify that resentment. Households are paying more into the system than ever before: income tax, sales tax, property tax, fuel tax, utility fees, licensing fees, yet vital public services are declining. Schools are closing, infrastructure is deteriorating, and essential community programs are underfunded despite taxpayers contributing thousands of dollars annually. Americans are asking a question the system cannot escape: where is the money going? This disconnect deepens when key government programs become unstable. Shutdown threats, benefit cuts, and administrative gridlock make it clear that political leaders are failing to provide even basic continuity. SNAP reductions, delays in processing refunds, and stalled public initiatives signal a system prioritizing political theater over public stability. In a time when families struggle with rising costs in every direction, the sight of political leaders debating instead of governing adds fuel to the fire. Corporate influence in policymaking amplifies the perception of betrayal. When legislation consistently benefits large companies, tax loopholes, and high-income groups, while leaving working families exposed to rising healthcare costs, unaffordable housing, and wage stagnation, many conclude that the political system serves the wealthy far more effectively than it serves voters. The belief that left versus right matters less than power versus the public grows stronger with every crisis. This backlash is not a side effect. It is a direct extension of the economic pressures described earlier. When people cannot afford basic necessities, when upward mobility collapses, and when institutions fail to deliver on their promises, trust decays rapidly. The middle class feels abandoned, overtaxed, and underrepresented. Public frustration is becoming a defining feature of the era, not because citizens expect perfection, but because they expect a system that works. Instead, they see one that extracts more while delivering less. The taxation backlash is not simply anger about money. It is anger about a system that no longer reflects the needs of the people who fund it. When every pressure point converges, soaring living costs, stagnant wages, collapsing businesses, generational stagnation, and political disillusionment, the nation approaches a moment no society can withstand: the disappearance of its middle class. The middle class isn't just an income group. It is the engine that drives consumption, fuels small businesses, stabilizes housing markets, and sustains tax revenue. When it erodes, the entire economic structure begins to tilt. Without a healthy middle class, consumer spending contracts sharply, triggering widespread business closures. Housing markets become volatile as fewer families qualify for mortgages. Local governments lose revenue, forcing cuts to schools, infrastructure, and public safety. As financial stress deepens, social trust erodes, and civic engagement declines. Historically, societies that lose their middle class experience greater instability, sharper polarization, and a rapid breakdown of community cohesion. This moment is approaching faster than many realize. When a majority of citizens cannot afford homes, medical care, or basic necessities, the foundation of the nation shifts. The country becomes divided between a small, insulated upper tier and a large population struggling for economic survival. The breaking point is not theoretical. It is visible in shrinking savings rates, record household debt, declining birth rates, and waves of early life burnout. The middle class is not just under pressure, it is being pushed toward extinction, and if it collapses entirely, the consequences will redefine the nation's future in ways far more destabilizing than any financial chart can show. We are witnessing more than an economic downturn. We are watching the slow dismantling of the lifestyle that once defined America. A society cannot survive when its workers cannot afford to live, when its young cannot build a future, and when its institutions no longer protect the people they claim to represent. But recognizing the crisis is the first step toward confronting it. If you felt this pressure in your own life, you're not imagining it. Millions are experiencing the same reality. Stay aware, stay informed, and take care of yourself, because this story affects every one of us.